So welcome everyone. If you are at all confused about where you are today or what's going on, this is our 10th session in our series on 10 meaningful science-backed rules for meaningful meetings. These sessions are held in association with a course that we put together, Dr. Joe Allen and I, deep diving into the science and practice of these meetings. And today we're looking at Rule 10. So Rule 10 is find a way to capture the results from your meetings, essentially. And the idea behind this rule is that as we meet with our teams, we are meant to be creating value. We're meant to be making decisions. We're meant to be updating our status. We're meant to be coming up with fabulous new ideas. And then we leave. We leave those meetings. So what happens with those results? Well, who here, like show of hands, watches true crime dramas or reads mystery stories at all? Anybody? Yeah? And anybody know about the reliability of eyewitness accounts? What do we know about that? Does anybody want to? Yeah, right. Right. So we're all in this meeting together, all of these people from around the world, and every single one of us is going to walk away with some completely different idea about what happened here. So one of the things we're doing is we're recording. And that's great. And as we've looked at all of these different rules over time, we've looked at, okay, how do we make the meeting more engaging? How do we keep it from drifting? How do we make each and every single one of our meetings more efficient so we can get those results that we can then record and then hopefully remember later? And all of that's incredibly important, but it still doesn't get us far enough when we are running businesses. Because when we are running businesses, we have to do that not just for this meeting, or that other meeting where we bring in a facilitator. We have to do it for each and every single one of the meetings that we run, which is why it's important as business leaders, as team leaders, and as participants that you design your meetings like you design your products. Now, this is a huge focus for those of you who are new to Lucid Meetings of my work, my company's work, and what we help clients do. And today I've invited one of the other people in the business world who I know has done amazing work on this to share how they've designed a meeting operating system for their business that helps them reliably capture those results and make sure the business can use them day after day after day. So with that, I would love to introduce to you Shishir Mehrotra. He is the founder and CEO of Coda, and Shishir is going to wow us with their meeting operating wisdom for the next 75 minutes. If you have questions, if you have anything you need to run in the chat, I'm here to help you out. But otherwise, Shishir, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Elise, and so nice to see such an interesting crowd. Looks like people from all over the world. So hopefully we're going to get to know each other a little bit better today. So I'm Shishir Mehrotra. I run a company called Coda. We make a new type of document. It blends the best parts of documents, spreadsheets, presentations, and applications into a single new canvas. I can talk more about that in a bit. Before this, I spent about 6 years at Google. I used to run the YouTube division there. Hopefully some of you have used YouTube and rely on it like much of the world does now. Before that, I was at Microsoft for a number of years, worked on the Office team, the Windows team, the SQL Server team, and started my first company before that called Coda. Probably most relevant to this discussion, until I met Elise, I thought I was one of the most nerdy meeting lovers that there was. Yeah, I thought that it's a topic I study and talk a lot about and have put a lot of energy into. And then I ran into first the Lucid Meetings blog and got pulled in down the rabbit hole of all the different amazing content that's there. And then I got to meet Elise and see some of the thinking behind the process. So I'm flattered and excited to be part of this group. Today, I'll post it another time. I know that the chat only shows for people as they join, so apologies for people who are seeing this for the fifth time. I'll post the link to the doc there, and I will share my screen. So if people could click on that link and jump in, we'll be using that in order to run our sessions and exercises today. Just to roadmap a little bit of what we're planning to do today, I have 5 or 6 different exercises that we put together. We'll try to keep it at sort of 8 to 10 minutes each. The core theme for the day as we explore this Rule 10, the phrase I like most to describe my approach is design your meetings like you design your products, and we're going to learn a lot more about that as we run through this. So we're going to start with an icebreaker of an exercise, and here's how it works. I'll just get out of present mode so I can see as people join. Looks like I have 9 people in, so a few people still joining, hopefully. So go ahead and click that link and hit sign in. And once you do, we'll give a few minutes for this exercise. You can navigate to the second page. So from the sidebar here, you go to Let's Start with an Exercise. And you can click on Add an Example. And what I want to do is everybody pick 1 to 3 meetings. 1 is fine. Try not to do 5 or 6. So just click the button that says Add an Example and fill this out and say the name of the meeting that is most on your mind. What does it feel like now? Structured. And what do you wish it felt like? And you can use, as much words as you like, and we'll come back and we'll do a fun exercise to see what everybody. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward so that we can stay a bit on time. So thanks everyone for adding your entries. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to reveal everybody. So here are everybody's entries, and you can take a moment to read through and see what everybody put in. Lots of different things here, but if you don't want to read through all of it, I'm going to show a few things that just summarize a little bit. So here's a word cloud of what everybody said for their meeting names. What's the most common word? Meeting. Okay, that's probably not that surprising. And the word weekly. Okay, that's interesting. And other than that, we see a pretty wide variety. A lot of time frames. So I see daily, weekly, quarterly. I see one-on-ones, I see product, I see team, I see staff. If we look at what does it feel like now? Okay, this is interesting. Random, boring, structured. Oh, we did see some good structured. Talking, lots. That's an interesting one to pop up. What do you wish it felt like? Oh, that's an interesting set of words. Collaborative, energetic, productive, clear, value, engaged, connected. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an icebreaker of what's on people's minds. I'm going to jump ahead. We're going to do a few more exercises, so hopefully that sort of broke the ice on what we're doing here. And I'm going to describe the principle that has most guided my approach to meetings, and that is the idea that you should design your meetings like you design your products. And I think the most influential thing I read on this topic is a book called Game Storming. And anyone who hasn't seen or read this book, I would highly suggest. It's probably designed well for this group. There's a link there to a summary as well if you want to look at that. And the book authors, by the way, are really amazing people. In the same group as the Lucid group in terms of very thoughtful approaches to meetings. And they start with this analogy that I really like. And this is sort of the picture of this is they start with this analogy of these 2 kids playing ball. And these kids are throwing balls back and forth, and the group grows and grows and grows. And at some point, one of the kids says, hey, let's turn this into a game. Let's see how many times we can throw the ball back and forth without dropping it. And the other kid says, oh, that sounds really interesting. How about we make it even harder, and every time we catch the ball, one of us takes a step back. And this game, all of a sudden, this thing that started as play transforms into a game. And their analogy from this, which I really like, is that sometimes we walk into meetings and they feel like play. We're not quite sure what we're doing. We're just messing around a bit. And sometimes they feel like a game. So what are the characteristics that make things feel like a game as opposed to as play? Well, games have rules. They have boundaries. You can do this. You can't do that. They have time limits. They have goals. They often have materials. You can't play ball without a ball. You can't do a post-it brainstorm without post-its. So there's all these things that lead to some things feeling like play and some things feeling like games. As I read this book, the thing I kept thinking about, especially for those of you that are in product development, is I, for a living, design applications. And you're looking at one of them, Coda. Before this, I worked a lot on an application called YouTube. And the types of thinking that go into designing an application are very much about starting from first principles and thinking about incentives. What would you like people to do? What would you like their goals to be? What would you like the boundaries to be? And so I found this idea to be really powerful. What if we stepped back and designed our meetings like we designed our products? Started with principles, started with goals, and then backed into what we'd like people to do. So I was going to show two quick examples that are very commonplace internally at Coda. And if you were to join the Coda team and you got to your first Friday and you didn't know what the words Dory and Pulse meant, you would be living under a rock. These are so endemic to everything that we do. And so I'll describe both of these, and then we'll participate in them as well. So the first one here is called Dory, and Dory's named after the fish who asks all the questions. Anyone who hasn't seen Finding Nemo, great movie recommendation. But the name is just kind of a fun take on it. It's very memorable. You can, if you're in your own Coda doc, you can hit /Dory and you can get your own. The way that this works is anybody can come in and they can add a question. And they can go fill in their question and say, should we be using Dory more often? And then anybody can come and upvote and downvote that question. So what's the principle? What is the thing we're trying to create out of this? Well, there's a few goals. The first one is we're trying to equalize the audience. This was originally designed when Coda is a very distributed team. This was originally designed as we became more and more distributed as a way to make sure that anybody could participate in the discussion. Anybody can raise their hand and ask a question and so on. But as we can tell, even in this situation, that's quite challenging. I can't see everybody's faces. I'm not quite sure where everybody's at for raising their hands. And it naturally biases towards whoever's a little bit more in a position of power, or maybe a little bit pushier or a little bit louder. Those are all the incentives we created in our current meeting game. So instead, in this pattern, by the way, feel free to jump in and add questions of your own just so you can play with it. Or upvote and downvote. Actually, what I'll do is I will erase the questions that I had put in there as preamble. Feel free to add your own. What happens with this is first we equalize our audience. Anybody can ask the question, and we see people that all of a sudden would have been very quiet and not necessarily participative, really form great questions. The second is we discuss what matters. So I'm sure you've walked out of a meeting before and felt like, well, that was fairly random. And in this case, what happens is we walk out of a meeting and we say, we didn't get to talk about everything, but we talked about everything that had at least 10 upvotes, or at least 3 upvotes. The third thing, which was a nice surprise out of this approach, is you get much better formed questions. It turns out if you ask people to write down their questions, they tend to put a little bit of thought into what their question is. So before we get to Pulse, I see a few people adding questions. Feel free to upvote and downvote the questions. Maybe I'll just take one as let's see if something can get to 3 upvotes, and we'll take a question just to show how this works. So feel free to upvote ones that we're looking at. All right. So maybe, and one of our principles when we do this in our meetings is we ask whoever asked the question to actually ask it again live. And I can talk more about the reasons why we do that. The primary reason is it makes the meeting much more human instead of just sort of walking down a list. But the other reason is it allows the person to offer a little bit more context on their question. So I'll just take one right now. So why don't we take one from Heather? Heather, you want to unmute and ask your question?
I actually didn't ask that question.
Uh-oh, looks like somebody overwrote Heather's answer. All right, so everybody's learning the process a bit. Anybody who asked the question want to jump in? Lots to learn. Can I edit someone else's questions? Yes, you can. We encourage you not to. We can set this so people don't. As actually, I hadn't thought about. Every time I run a session like this, I learn which parts of this are learned behavior and which parts of this are tool behavior. But we've gradually at Coda learned not to edit other people's questions unless you really want to or have to. Robin asked a question in the chat. In real life, not the session, could you make the question submittal anonymous? Absolutely. And actually, I will show you an example of that in a moment as people have done it. So I'm going to jump ahead a bit and get to the second example, which we call Pulse. And the way this works is I'll show mechanically how this works. So let's imagine we're running exercise. This is how do you feel about the game storing method? I can click this box and it'll hide everybody's responses, kind of like we did earlier. And then I can add my own pulse check and I can say, how do I feel about it? I think that it is life-changing. And now when I click this button, I'll get to see everybody's responses. So maybe everybody can take a moment and add some responses. You'll notice here I have this is a formula that tells me how many people have submitted. So in Coda, you can write formulas anywhere. You can kind of think about Coda as an all-in-one document where you can use it a lot like a Google Doc. I'm going to leave this button unchecked for now so people can keep submitting. It's a please don't check the button. I could lock it, but I'm trying not to. So so we have 23 submissions now. Somebody really wants to uncheck it. Maybe I'll have to lock it in a second. That's okay. The main idea here, I think I'm at 25, so I'll go ahead and uncheck now. And the main idea here is, why do we do this? Well, there's a few different reasons. First one is we avoid groupthink. So what happened? Everybody got to put in their responses. Some people positive. Some people not so sure yet. Somebody thinks it's chaotic. Actually, these three were my sample responses, so I will delete these. So lots of different range of questions. I get a little pulse on how things are going. Again, this method allows you to equalize hierarchy. So you'll end up with now, usually in meetings, you'd say, how do we think about this? And now we go around the room and somebody says, I feel great about it. The second person says, I feel great about it. What does the third person say? Well, they have no choice. They have to say, I feel great about it, because that's all they're left with. And if they're not in a position of power, they might be even more afraid to describe how they feel about something. It helps to contextualize feedback. I find that by doing this pulse check early on, we'll get a sense of how people feel about things, so that now all the rest of the questions they ask and how they participate, now we know where they stand. And say, I'm a little bit confused about this, or I feel great about this. I'd love to learn more. And then finally, it draws out latent concerns. Lots of cases where people might have an issue, but it's not sort of the main line of what we're discussing, or it's not a popular opinion. And this allows them to bring that out. So if you were to step back and think about this principle, design your meetings like you design your products. If I were to start with this prompt and said, I'd like to run a meeting that avoids groupthink, equalizes hierarchy, contextualizes feedback, and draws out latent concerns, what might I design for that? So this is one example of what we designed. This is the Pulse. But I'm going to use this principle throughout our session to talk about different ways that people have designed their meetings like they designed their products. John talks about Chatterfall, which I've never heard of before, actually. So looks like a thing for me to go learn more about. Griselle asked, how do you deal with the delay to the internet quality? Or due to the internet quality. Yeah, that's an issue with any online tool. You know, for our meetings, this is not a primary issue for us, although it does happen. Actually, the document tends to work better than Zoom that way. And so we'll often find that people that have not so great internet feel like they can now still participate because they can load and interact with the document, even if their video doesn't work, which is a higher bandwidth activity. But of course, if you can't connect at all, then none of these tools really help that. So I'm going to.
I think actually, Shishir, I would love to just level up for just 1 second, if I can,
sure.
right here on
Please.
this one. So one of the things that we're doing here, just to put it in context, is we're playing with a particular tool, right? We're playing with technology. And one of the, and you know, some of what we're experiencing is just new tech. And that's going to be the case no matter what you try with any technology that your team adopts. The thing that's critical to keep in mind is that once you and your team do in fact pick something to use, it really doesn't matter until you have agreed upon ways in which you're going to use it, which is what these examples are. So here's the Dory, here's the Pulse. Here are two things that Coda's team completely understands how to use and how to be effective, and they're not writing on top of each other or showing the buttons when they're supposed to. And when you design a system like that and your team already knows how to use it and they already know how to click all the buttons and they come in, their meetings self-document, right? You've created a game everybody knows how to play. So whether it's this technology or another technology, don't let the idea that, hey, you're working through the buttons get in the way of the larger picture.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's I'm going to use Coda as my examples, both because it's helpful to talk about what we do and it's the tool we build. But the real principle here is design your meetings like you design your products, and think about the incentives you're creating as you design your meetings. So for the rest of this time, what I'd like to do is run through some examples. And from our vantage point at Coda, we've had a chance to see many different patterns for how people how teams operate. You know, Coda is now used by about 35,000 teams around the world. It's spread quite quickly. And so we get kind of a first-hand look. And what I'm going to try to do is run through a set of case studies of what I've seen and how people use or how people run their meetings like they design their products. And I'm going to divide this into 3 sections. And so let me just define some quick terminology on this. This is heavily influenced by, if people haven't read this post, probably the most influential post on the Lucid site that I read was the 16 types of meetings. And I'll click through it if people haven't seen it. This is a wonderful summary and framework from the Lucid team. On different types of meetings. We've adapted it slightly into 3 sets just to make it digestible for our team, and we've kind of personalized it a little bit to how we think about it. So this is how we describe our 3 types of meetings at Coda: context, cadence, and catalyst. And I actually had one of our designers got really excited about it and built pictures that are meant to convey something about each type of meeting. So I'll start in the middle here. So cadence meetings. So notice the picture is a circle with a set of people around it. The reason for that is cadence meetings we think of as standing group of people, meaning the same group meets over and over again. That's what the circle is meant to represent. And the idea is that they're trying to hold themselves accountable to a shared goal. These meetings, the characteristics, they tend to be recurring. They tend to have rollover agendas, meaning if we don't finish, we continue the next time. If we have action items, we continue that the next time. A common pattern is something like understand, commit, check and steer, review and celebrate, and return to the top. And you know, everybody has a slightly different loop for it, but many cadence meetings have some loop, some pattern of how they run through things. And the typical test for these meetings is something like, is our team on track for the goals we set? This is our staff meeting. This is our OKR meeting. This is our check-in forum. We refer to those as cadence meetings. A second one, I'll go to the right here, is called catalyst meetings. And you'll notice here, it's a diamond shape where the people are a little bit smaller and the light bulb is a little bit bigger. And the reason we use that term is we think of catalyst forums as ones where an emergent group of people are brought together to discuss a specific topic. So these meetings focus on the topic, not on the group. That means oftentimes these are standing forums, things like product review, decision review, deal review. Those are all things that we often think about as catalyst forums, where the group of people might change. But they're generally held around a topic. Generally, rollover agendas don't make sense for these meetings because the group of people next time is going to be totally different, and the topic might be totally different. Our pattern for these is to classify them as ideate, frame, propose, act. Eigen question is a term we can talk later about if people are interested. But these meetings follow, the reason this diamond pattern is here is sometimes they're about opening up ideas and saying, hey, I would love to brainstorm. Let's hear what everybody has to say. Sometimes they're about closing down and saying, we're ready to make a decision. And so we look at this diamond, ideate, frame, propose, act, as being along the diamond. The typical test we use for this is, did the makers, makers our term for the people in the middle of this group, did the makers get clarity on their question? And then finally over here, context meetings. Context meetings are very, very diverse type of meetings for us, wide variety of meetings with the similar theme is that the goal is to increase baseline shared perspective. So our designer came up with for this one, this is meant to represent like a square dance. And so it's a group of people standing outside of an open dance floor. Some set of people get in the middle and they do their dance and then they get back out. And that's a pattern, for example, that we use for every Friday. We do a meeting we call Friday demos, and so some team gets in the middle, they demonstrate what they did that week, and they get back out. Some of these can be very formal. We do things like hackathons, we do things like new hire orientation. Some can be very informal. We do a family trip once a year. We didn't get to do it this year, which is really sad. We do lots of book clubs. But the key test of these, because they're super wide variety, everything from book clubs to demo time, is the test we use is, did I come away better informed to do my job? And these are really a meta type of meeting where the goal is not necessarily hold accountability to goals or get clarity on a question, but just help everybody be in better position to do their job. That could be better trained, better informed, in whatever way that might be. So these are three terms we use to describe meetings. They're not exactly the lucid terms. Hopefully, Elise will forgive me. They're heavily inspired by some of those terms.
Actually, I just wanted to comment. One of the things that I love about what you've done is that they're your specific language. And that is something that we see in any company that's really embraced making their meetings run well, is they give it special language, special names, special roles. It becomes part of how you define the game at your company so that you can bring new players onto the team and they can, hit the deck running. So.
Right. So with that in mind, for the next half hour or so, my plan is to run through for each of these a series of examples. And what I've done is I've tried to pull a list. I won't run through all of these, so I'm going to pick one or two and just show you how a few different teams have applied this principle, design your meetings like you design your products, within their way of operating. By the way, I've included in each of these pages a set of discussion topics. So as I run through these examples, if you'd like, feel free to add discussion topics there, and you can upvote and downvote them, and we can take questions that way. But now we get to the fun part of this, which I think of as storytelling time. So I get to talk a little bit about some experiences of teams that I've had a chance to work with. And I'll say again, in my last job, where I was running the YouTube team, I got exposed to such a wide variety of different types of creative people and makers and so on. And it's been one of the pleasures of my life to do this again at Coda. And the wide variety of different types of teams is really exciting. So let me jump in and I will show some of these examples. I'm going to start with the second one here. And by the way, there's I'll mention as well, there's a list at the end called resources that has lots and lots of these examples, including all the different ones we're walking through here, that you can feel to run through later if you like. Each one is its own interesting story. There's no way I could run through all of them. But I'm going to start with this one, and I'm not going to run through all parts of how these teams operate, but I'm going to try to focus on one element of it. So in this case, this is a company called Figma, and Figma makes a design tool. It's kind of like Google Docs for Google Docs meets Photoshop. If people haven't used it, it's a very interesting design tool, one of the most popular tools in the tech industry right now, and a very hot company. This post was written by their head of product, a guy named Yuki Yamashita, and he talks about a meeting they have, which is their launch review meeting. I guess they called it their coordinator meeting. Which is about as boring a name for a meeting as you can find. And basically the idea is they get together every Thursday and they talk about what's launching. And this is what's coming out this week, and this is what's coming out next week, and how is it on track? Is it not? One of the most boring meetings that you could come up with. And there's lots of interesting things in this document, but the one I want to focus on is one small thing they did here. And Yuki, who I think is a masterful meeting organizer, came up with this idea. So they have a list of the different things that are happening, what stage they're at, are they launching, what's their latest status. And what he did was he created two buttons. One, which is a person with their hand raised for asking a question, and another, which is a set of hearts. And he did something just subtle but very creative. The question button you can only press once, but the heart button you can press as many times as you want. And all of a sudden, the nature of this meeting shifted. It used to be everybody sat in this meeting and waited for everybody else's updates to be done, and then they get their turn and they describe what's happening with their launch, and then they move on. But they mostly are disengaged when other people are talking. All of a sudden, with this heart mechanism, they got a chance for people to interact meaningfully and say, I think this is worth a lot of kudos. I would think this is a thing that everybody should be paying attention to. And it made the meeting enormously more fun. So I thought this was a really interesting, very simple example of a technique that sort of transformed a very boring meeting into a very fun meeting. If I go back to our word cloud at the beginning, boring was a very common term for describing meetings today. So that was one example I wanted to start with. The second one, this one is from Uber, and this was made by a guy named Yishin. And this is actually Uber is one of our largest customers. We have 6,000-7,000 users at Uber now. But the very first one was a document built for a large application redesign. So what they did, this was done about 2 years ago now. You may remember this time when Uber redesigned everything they did for drivers. Uber was under a lot of scrutiny for how they were treating drivers. I guess they still are. And they started a project they internally referred to as a name they called Project Carbon. And the idea was 180 days of change for drivers. So they were going to, every day, they're going to ship something new for drivers. And this is when things like tipping for drivers came out. They ended up running this project in Coda. And the interesting thing about it is there were about 300 people in their virtual team to run this project, right? So and so a very large project. And as you can imagine at Uber, that was every different discipline you can think of. They have people in every city. They call them general managers in every city that have to participate in this. They have product managers. They have data scientists. They have marketers. They have salespeople. They have finance people. Everybody has to participate in this and try to bring it all together. And so they designed this as their cadence doc, which was their sort of accountability doc. And this is a template of it, so it's not their actual data. But the basic idea was every team went and created their own space. And so they used it to create, for example, a space to keep their specs or their meeting notes and so on. And from that perspective, they ended up using Coda kind of like a large wiki, but having everything in one place was really impactful. In Coda, the way that tables work, so this is how they created a set of different resources. One table was created by the development team, was all the features they were going to ship. And these were a long list of all those different features. In Coda, the tables can act a little, they look like spreadsheets, but they act a little bit closer to databases. And so every team went and created their own view of those tables. So this is, for example, a mapping team has a view of the mapping features. Maybe the industrial design team likes to take the same thing but look at it as cards. This is a team that maybe thinks more like Trello. Another team looks at it a little bit more like a Gantt chart. Maybe another team looks at it as a calendar. So everybody could sort of see the same thing. But the most unique thing they did was they scripted a very common workflow, which is a team is stuck. And what they did was they turned this into a button. So just like we were doing our upvote, downvote buttons, they created a button that says, I need help. And anybody in their view or in the main view can go and say, hey, this project is not on track. We need help. And they can go and click this button. And what would happen is every Tuesday, they would get together and see all the things where the button had been clicked to say they need help. And it was a very simple thing to highlight that there's sort of two different principles that were happening here. One, it's hard to get people to say that they're behind. Right? So why say they're behind? Because it's embarrassing. It's not quite what people want to say. But on the other hand, if you know there's a forum where I can escalate to, now the action is not say you're behind and be embarrassed in front of your colleagues. The action is put myself in the queue of people that can say they need help. They also interestingly called this funding tracker. Now, most of the times when people needed help, it wasn't funding shortage, but everybody was excited to ask for funding. And so this is a way to get people to be upfront about when they were stuck. And when they were running 180 days of change across 300 people, their cadence meeting had to be something where they encouraged people to speak up when they were behind. So those are two examples. Figma used hearts to bring joy and fun to a meeting that otherwise would have been very boring. Uber created this all-in-one space where every team could participate and scripted the moves for their most impactful workflow so that people actually brought things forward when they were behind instead of just hiding them. So this is one example we start with cadence. I'm happy to pause and take some questions. Any observations from people of cadence meetings that you have or techniques you've tried that you might want to share as well?
I have to say one of the things I really like about what I'm seeing in these examples is that the cadence meetings tend to be, like you said, like the most boring, dreaded meetings. And having these formalisms allows people to deal with all of the information sharing outside of the meeting, so that when you show up, when it's well designed, the meeting itself can be interesting and fast. And that's the bomb when it comes to these weekly team meetings.
Okay. Yeah, and it also seems like a lot of these things promote interaction between people who otherwise would be on the sidelines. So getting more broad-based interaction and engagement, I guess, in whatever way that engagement happens, seems to be an interesting aspect and the design factor.
Right. Other thoughts? I allocated 10 minutes. So I'm going to jump ahead to the next section. We can come back to it as well. If people have other questions, feel free to also put them in the chat, and we can come back to questions that way too. I'm going to jump ahead to Catalyst meetings. And just as a reminder, Catalyst meetings most commonly are referred to as our decision-making forums. At Coda, we tried not to call them decision-making forums because back again to that diamond shape, sometimes these meetings are meant to close down decisions, but for us, these meetings are often also meant to open up discussions. And so we'll do brainstorms and idea generations and so on as Catalyst meetings as well. But the example I'll start with here is one from this person, Gokul Rajaraman. And Gokul's had a really interesting career. Find Gokul here. And he came up with this thing he calls SPADE. Gokul and I actually worked together over a decade ago at Google. His career is interesting. He ran product for Square. He then ran a company called Caviar, which DoorDash ended up purchasing. He was also responsible for building all the early systems at Facebook that especially focused on monetization. But this technique is called SPADE, is his technique for making decisions. And it's a very simple technique, but especially at every company he's been at, it's become a de facto ritual for how they run their decision-making forums. And I thought this was a good example of how they did it. And the write-up is very interesting, but I was just going to jump ahead to the actual framework. So let me jump ahead to the framework here. And this is what SPADE stands for. SPADE is setting, people, alternatives, decide, explain. And the basic idea is that he asks whenever somebody has a hard decision to write up, they actually use it as a noun. Can you send me the spade for this decision? And what they do is the setting is they ask people to fill in the what, the why, and the when. What is the decision to be made? Why does this decision matter? Why are we making it? And when does the decision need to get made by? Second is people. They use I'm sure everybody has their own terms for this. They use responsible, approver, consulted. A lot of people use different terms for this, but there's some way to describe the different people involved in the decision. Who's going to make the decision? Who's going to approve it? Who needs to be involved or be consulted? One of their key principles is alternatives. That they try very hard to make sure that before we get to a decision, try to brainstorm openly and publicly to generate alternatives. And so in this case, they said alternatives should be feasible, different from each other, and comprehensive. Maximally cover the problem space. Thought that was a very interesting one. This is, by the way, a technique I've seen over and over again. We use at Coda as well. Is great decision-making forums tend to start with alternatives before you get to the up-down vote. Decide. One of their core principles is when they decide, everyone votes in private. And this is, lots of people have different views on how to do this. This is how they do it. Everyone votes in private. Decision maker takes the inputs into consideration, as well as the pros and cons of each alternative, and then decides, and then explains. Typically, this is an email, but is often linked to and is in a repository in a doc like this. He included a few example spades that I thought were fairly fun, and this is one about naming a feature, which is naming a particular feature and discussing different alternatives for it. He has another one here of picking an applicant tracking system from Square. In this case, there was a setting. There was actually a slide deck that went through the context for this problem, the set of people, there were a set of alternatives, there's a decision that was made, and then there was an explanation. So this is one example of a catalyst topic. And let me pause again and hear people's thoughts and feedback. And I'm happy to run through another example if people would like. This is a topic where the frameworks are fairly wide. A few other examples in here. This one is from Adam Nash, who started a company called Wealthfront and then ran product for Dropbox. Eigenquestions is one of mine on how we frame problems here. Superhuman, if people haven't tried it, is a company that makes an email alternative, Gmail alternative. Reid Hoffman made an interesting one about how to do blitz scaling, which is about from a book he wrote. Actually, let me show one other one that was asked earlier. This is one made by a guy named Ben Lee on unbiased voting, and he really liked the idea we do with Dory. And he created a slightly different version. And actually, this is what we use internally. This is very similar to the thing we did with voting earlier. But what you'll notice in here is, actually, I have to have someone else do it in order to show it, is actually, it will only show author for the questions I asked and hide it for everyone else. And so what I really like this example as one where he went a step beyond what we had provided and just crafted a little bit of the game that he wanted in his meetings. Let's see. I see a few comments in the chat. Spade is excellent, would reveal immediately a non-transparent decision culture. Yes, I think that is correct. And I mean, teams that Gokul runs always report this, that they tend to have very open decision-making forums. A little bit higher up, Stefan asked or mentioned that it seems to be limited technically versed people. I think as Elise pointed out, new tools often have different learning curves. But I would focus less on the tool and more on the principles that everybody's working on. Spade, as an example, is equally well done in Word and Google Docs and in Coda and so on. So I don't think it's really about the tool. It's about really, in that case, writing up the framework that he wanted for how decision making should be done. Yes, John, I think that's a good comment on how people codify their systems. Great. Any other questions or thoughts?
Well, I'm curious actually to hear from other people in the audience. So SPADE is one decision-making formalism, and there are a bunch of different decision-making formalisms depending on the kind of business operating system. So basically the way in which decisions get made in your business. Does anybody else use something that's like SPADE in your work? Does anybody use Lumio or the advice process or anything like that? And if you do, I would love to hear like an unmute and just sort of comment on how this relates to your work.
Well, Elise?
Yeah.
And maybe some of the others there know, I provided a template for Lucid meetings back, I don't know, a couple of years ago, maybe, about the importance of including criteria in a decision-making process. In other words, as you're developing alternatives and things, have a set of external, criteria, references that you can use to evaluate the different options as one of the parts of the decision-making process. But it doesn't come as it also serves to justify the decision you made at the end, the explain part here. But if everybody has that at the same time that they have the information that's needed to set up their proposals or their alternatives, it can be very helpful to identify the alternatives early. I mean, the criteria early in the game.
Right on. So yeah, so as Bia mentions, there are all kinds of ways in which if your team doesn't have something like SPADE and you're looking to design this, right? So these are all examples of people who have found their way and then codified that way literally in Coda in software so that their teams can run them over and over and over again. Design once, reuse. That's how you make meetings efficient. Both Bia and then there's another one from Eric Coriel have provided templates that help teams understand what kind of criteria they should use in their decision-making in the first place and decide what kind of decision-making methods they should use for different kinds of decisions. Because while the SPADE process is one cool way to go about making decisions, it's not appropriate for a fast decision, right? Some things Shishir would just decide.
Yeah.
Right? He's not gonna run through a document, and it's not appropriate necessarily for things that require legal votes. So anyway, that process of figuring out what your process ought to be then allows you to then code it up and make it something repeatable for your team. Saves you millions of hours going forward.
Right. Peter added a question here. Did you want to ask your question?
So actually, I wanted to ask the question whether the decision-making rituals or the mechanisms or the frameworks were already in place in the teams, and they used, let's say, a coding a template to put it into, let's say, the independent reality, or they designed, so by an iterative process, this decision-making mechanism itself while coding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a really important point. Is that and I think it relates to John asked a question in the chat as well. Who should be doing this? The business exec or someone more tech? I think the principle of design your meetings like you design your apps. I think that it's a responsibility. That responsibility falls to very different people in an organization. We generally refer to them as the makers. And one interesting thing is sometimes it's the person in charge, but often it's not. And I found that really interesting, that the person who raises their hand and says, I don't think this is going quite well, let's do this game a little bit differently, is often not the person in charge. It's the person with a little bit of energy and empathy for it. It doesn't remove responsibility from the person in charge, but it's been really interesting characteristic that, as an example, the one we ran through with Figma and Yuki, he was not really in charge of that meeting, but he was a heavy participant in this cross-functional forum, and he said, I bet we could do this a little bit differently. The other point, Stefan, that you're asking about is, do you set it, or do you itself use a technique like this to come up with a framework? I actually think that's very important as well. And so I've seen, I'm sure everybody has at one point had a dreaded meeting about meetings, but it actually can be quite important to talk a bit about what are we trying to accomplish, and we're going to establish a game, and what do we want? Do we want a culture where anybody can speak? Do we want a culture where it's fun, or is that actually not the point? This is all business, and we want to discourage that. Are we optimizing for time, or are we optimizing for exploration? And it's kind of related to the point that B was just making on defining your criteria. So I absolutely think that's a valuable thing to do. We do it, probably every 6 months or so. Some major forum gets redesigned at Coda because somebody comes up with a different perspective on, what if we added this criteria, or what if we thought about this differently. Maybe I'll go to Peter's question. Peter, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, the question was about how they use these templates. Do they use them sometimes offline, maybe leave them up for a while and collect information, and then come online and do the upvoting and discussion?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I've seen both. I mean, one of the principles that these days is very common in terms of criteria for meetings is how synchronous or asynchronous they should be. And one of the things that, for example, we use Dorian Pulse as two of our very common techniques. Oftentimes, we set those up assuming there will be a meeting, but we send it out well in advance. People add their questions, and we actually generally add a column for answers as well. And they add their pulse check. And before we get to the meeting, well, somebody will say, actually, it looks like everybody voted, 5 out of 5 stars, and we've answered all the questions. No need for the meeting. And so in our case, we've adapted the process to actually, run the meeting to prevent the meeting. And we've definitely seen people, use that as a criteria and do it that way. We've seen other cases where, you sort of lock it and say, no, I'm not going to let you even add questions or thoughts until you hear from the presenter. And so you need to wait and not start until we get to that point. Just depends what incentive you're looking for. I suspect, especially in a world that is gradually getting used to being more distributed and on Zoom and so on, we're going to see more and more techniques that work synchronously, but also work asynchronously, sort of work into our cultures. So I think we'll see that commonplace. Scott asked a question. Maybe I'll make this the last one before I jump to the next section. He asked, what percentage of our meetings fit into these 3 C's? And maybe I'll just answer with some data. So this is our, pull this up for you. We do classify all our meetings. I'll just show you our company calendar as an example of this. We just redid it actually, so you'll be able to sense this. While I pull this up, the vast majority of our meetings end up being cadence meetings. It's a very sort of common meeting type, and I think there's good reasons for that. I'd say that's the especially as you think about. Pull this up here. Oh, I'm in the wrong tab. Moment. Okay, here we go. So this is actually our meeting waterfall. And actually, as a side note, you'll notice this is in a discussion where we talked about calendar compaction ideas and and we came up with a set of criteria. And to the point of like, do you run a meeting, design your meetings? Absolutely. And in this case, this is actually a little peek into, it's kind of, I hadn't expected to show this, but I think it's probably pretty safe. So this is our weekly meeting calendar for our company. And we actually, and this is down here, was the pulse check. So everybody came in and said how they feel about it, and what they like and dislike about it. And then there's a Dory. So this is, like I said, very common to do in our circumstance. So this is, everybody private in meetings is a very sensitive topic. You can tell there's a wide variation of 3 stars, 5 stars, so on. People don't hold back in terms of what their sentiment is. To answer your questions on meeting types, every meeting on here is classified in 2 ways. One is by type and one is by audience. So let me just flip it to, this is by type. So in this case, everything that is blue is a cadence meeting, everything that is orange is a context meeting, and the red is our catalyst meeting. So we have, as a company, we have 2 primary catalyst forums. We decided to consolidate those. Anybody can sign up for them twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays we do it. We do a series of context meetings. So in particular, our most important one is every Friday, we do a all hands, we call it weekly demos. And everything else tends to be cadence meetings. And these are usually structured around our team structure. One fun thing we did was, which I think is a common criteria, is we talked about how much time these meetings take per week. And so this is looking at per person. So in this case, I'm required in most of these meetings. That calendar represents for me about 15.5 hours a week of meeting time. For my staff, it represents about 10 hours a week. For the average Coda employee, it represents about 5 hours a week. And the previous version of this, what I could show you as well, we ended up shaving about 4 hours off of each of these times by creatively thinking through which meetings do we need and not need. So this is answering both your question on percentage of time as well as sort of the process of how we thought about creating these meetings. And I realize.
I know this is like, you have another whole section to get to, but we have to stop on this because this is so great, because this is the point, right? Because when you design your meetings, all of a sudden you can lay them out like this. And I hope you all noticed that Wednesday is free, right? They have a home for all their conversations. If something comes up, it can go on one of those red days. That means they don't need random meetings showing up on Wednesday, because they've designed for random things to come up. And each and every one of these can get more and more efficient, more tight, more fun, because they know what it is. They're not guessing. So this is why you do what we call meeting flow modeling. If anybody's been through a program with me and you've done the math, we do exactly this math, right? You can actually do allocation. If you're a business leader, you can adjust your staffing levels knowing what it takes to deliver and how much communication is involved in your programs, because you got that many hours of project management time. This is the bomb.
Yeah. I super impactful. Yes, I missed that. Wednesday is no meetings. Another thing that may not be obvious here is our blocked meeting time is 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. We have a lot of, we've decided that we'd align to the US time zones. And we're a distributed team, but that's what we decided it would be our core work hours. So standing meetings aren't allowed outside that time. My staff is a little bit of an exception, but that's the exception that makes the rule, I guess. But yes, this is how we run. This is how we run our meeting operating system. All right, I will jump back and do one last section, and this one I think is a lot of fun because there's so much variety in it. And so context meetings, like I said, context meetings are all sorts of different types. And there's demos, there's one-on-ones. That calendar I showed, for example, didn't show one-on-ones. I call, actually, in the Lucid terminology, they call them cadence meetings. My philosophy on one-on-ones is to treat them as context meetings, meaning that the goal of we have another forum we call tag-ups, which is really about driving accountability to teams. We treat one-on-ones as context because we focus on them as coaching. And I had 2 examples I wanted to run through here that I think are really fun. So the first one, we're short on time, so I may only do one of these. The first one I wanted to run through is one-on-ones, and I'm going to show you. This one came from a woman named Jenny Emick, but I'm going to show you the version that's been adapted for our own team. And I just really love this example because it's very simple but very insightful. So Jenny is a design lead at Square, and she has a team of designers that work for her. Back to the question of, who designs meetings and she's not really in a position of power to do this, but she's very heavily motivated. And so she jumped ahead of the line, and she had two observations that led to this template. So one is, and you can read more about Jenny in one of the links in that table. But Jenny saw two things. Number one, she saw that the designers on her team were complaining that they didn't get meaningful performance feedback until review time. They do reviews twice a year, and everybody would complain that, how come you're telling me what I'm good at and not good at only twice a year? I'd prefer to know more often. The second thing she noticed was that everybody had a doc for their one-on-ones. Every manager-employee pair had a doc. In their case, they were almost entirely Google Docs, but people do it in Word or whatever else. And the docs all looked the same. They were about 60 pages long. And they said date, notes, date, notes, date, notes, date, notes. Somewhere in the middle of it was really meaningful performance feedback. Somewhere in the middle of it was really clear coaching. And somewhere in the middle of it was great goals feedback. And what she did was she turned this into a new template with a very simple idea. So Coda docs have these things we call pages, which you're now all very familiar with. You can kind of think of them like tabs in a spreadsheet turned sideways. I don't know why spreadsheets have a monopoly on tabs, but we thought that was silly. And she just created a page for each of those things. And so she has one. She starts with one she calls partnership, which is, what are the expectations that an employee has and that a manager has? And all she does is ask people just write them down. And write down some joint agreements. One of the most impactful ones I always do is, if one of us has a conflict, we will generally reschedule or cancel. It's amazing how much people don't even talk about this. And then somebody is hurt when, hey, you kept canceling my one-on-ones. Then she created separate pages for a place for the performance feedback, a place for goals review, a place for a thing they call kudos, which is just keeping track of positive experiences that happen so they can know that when they come to review time. A place for just keeping track of our shared reading. This is our best practices in reading. And a place for the meeting notes. And they use this, we have a little feature in Coda called collapsing, and they use this to take the part that certainly there's a date notes portion. But the other thing she did here, she asked everybody, in your own employee manager pair, design that meeting template. And so sort of within this, this is mine actually, is I ask my employee when they start their one-on-one, just fill in how you're feeling. And this is really, I'm sure you've been through this experience where you start a one-on-one and you say, how's it going? And the person says, yeah, it's going pretty well. And then 3 weeks later they quit. And you say, wait, I thought you told me it was going pretty well. And I said, yeah, but you didn't really mean that. That was just banter. You weren't really asking me how things are going. I said, no, from now on, I'm asked that question, how are things going, but I want you to write down how you're really feeling. And I would like you to tell me if things are not going well. And if they're not, I want you to tell me why. And it's just an interesting way to change how you think about meetings. So here's the reason I love this example as a context meeting. So first off, one-on-one is the meeting I think many of us probably just take for granted. I'd say we have this one-on-one and maybe we have a little bit of an agenda and so on, but we don't really put that much. We put a lot of thought into our big meeting forums that have 20 people in them and so on. But this one is actually really impactful. It's how people grow. It's how people are coached. And we don't put often as much thought into it as we do our bigger forums. The other reason I really like it as an example is every manager-employee pair is different. If you take, for the mathematically inclined group, the number of pairs in a group is very large, right? And so if you take even in a team of 20 people, the number of one-on-ones that you created is incredibly high. And the idea that everybody should take their one-on-one and think about, what are the expectations of our pair? What are we going to hold each other accountable to? I expect immediate feedback. I actually don't love immediate feedback. I'd really like you to batch it up and just give it to me at that time because I don't want to be distracted from let's have that conversation about how we do that. So this is one good example of a context meeting. The other one I was going to run through, but I'll skip it. You can read it later. Is one from Claire on how to run great offsites. Claire is the COO of Stripe, and she has this really creative system on how to run great offsites, which is another one of my favorite types of context meetings. But let me pause for a moment and just take a couple questions before we do our closing exercise. Thoughts and reactions, context meetings.
So John and Stefan are talking a bit about like, how much time does it take to do this, and what's the perceived ROI for getting your meeting system all set up? Maybe you could tell just really quickly some of your experience at YouTube that helps illustrate that.
Sure, and there is a doc actually in the resources. If people are curious on the YouTube system, I included this doc here. It's called the YouTube Hypergrowth Cadence. Feel free to read that as well. That talks a little bit about that experience. And you know, at YouTube, we had a few thousand people in the company, and we grew very fast. And we grew from when I joined, it was about 100 people, and by the time I left, it was a few thousand. And so in that process, your systems naturally break. Right? So whatever system you came up with, you know, 6 months later, you're looking at it and say that didn't scale. And of course it didn't. You know, the company is now 3 times as big, and you got to go back and look at it again. And so there, our pace of change on these systems was incredibly high. That's not true of every team, but it was true for how we were operating. And so it allowed us, or forced us, to rethink our systems often. And how did we want to think about decision making? One of the forms we invented was this thing we called tag-ups. It's described in that document as a type of group one-on-one, because we found that we were often sharing information through one-on-ones that really needed to go to their set of counterparts as well. You know, in terms of the time investment, like many, you know, there's an old famous quote from, I'm going to forget, I think it was George Washington, but maybe it was Thomas Jefferson, that if I had a whole day to cut down a tree, I'd spend half the day sharpening my axe. Somebody's going to correct me on who was the quote in a moment. But you know, I think at the time it doesn't seem that valuable, and I'm sure every one of you, you guys are all taking, you know, an hour plus out of your day to go learn about meetings. And I can only imagine when you come back with your learnings and want to talk about meetings, that there's going to be a set of people that say, let's just start cutting down the damn tree. Let's stop talking about the axe. And I think that idea is, you know, obviously works in the short run, but doesn't work in the long run. So I think making space for that is very impactful, but it's hard. And in my view, what I found is I'll find the similar group of pirates that are also interested in this problem. And, you know, people will, it's almost like if you put a magnet in the middle of a set of materials, you know, things will sort of glom on. If you just toss out there, hey, I've been thinking about redesigning our meeting cadence a bit. Who's interested in helping me? You know, 90% of people are going to run away. And there's going to be this small group, and they may not actually be the people in charge, but they're going to be the small group that's really passionate about it, and they'll actually be quite happy to help you think through it and design it. So like in our case, you know, when I did that for, you know, a couple of years ago, we redesigned our process, a designer showed up in that group and ended up building these like wonderful drawings of our 3 C's of meetings that turned out to be like the critical part of rolling this out. Was like a lot of people are visual thinkers, and so for them, oh, that's the circle meeting, that's the diamond meeting, that's the square meeting. That's what they remembered, and that's what. And it was, you know, really interesting to get a person with that talent to come into that. So not always the most fun thing to go work on for some people. For me, it's incredibly fun. I find it to be incredibly high leverage, and the axe analogy is very impactful for me. Let me jump to our closing exercise, and I always like to close where we started. And so what I'm going to do is, if you go to that last section here, let me close all this up for a moment. This should show the list of meetings that you started with. And if you go in, what I'd love you to do is, if you can, fill in which type of meeting it was, context, cadence, or catalyst. And it's just an interesting way to test whether this framework holds for you. And the other thing is, if you have any ideas, how are you going to improve your meetings? And just fill in one idea for how you're going to improve that meeting. and let's see if we can create a little bit of survey and accountability out of this. We're going to run out of time in 3 minutes, so I'll give people, let's do 90 seconds, whatever's top of mind. By the way, while people are thinking and adding, just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time in this session and these exercises. All right, let's go see what people came up with. So like before, I'm going to check this box that will unveil everybody's responses. So it looks like some people picked and filled in cadence, catalyst, so on. Let's go look at it a little bit analytically. So just as a reminder, these were the word cloud of the names of meetings. I find word clouds to be a really powerful way to get quick sentiment on unstructured topics, names of meetings, feelings, what do you wish it felt like. So we added 2 things. What type of meeting is it? So people went and classified meetings. Looks like cadence meetings were the most common of the ones that got classified, which matches my experience as well. Cadence meetings are very, very common. And here's a word cloud of what people said in there. How will they improve it? And so add, try, meeting, Dory, sentiment, find, pulse, fun. Or some good addition. So hopefully everybody got a bit out of this. Just to maybe close and repeat the main principle I hope people take away, if you take nothing else. As you go back and look at your meetings and think about designing your meetings, think about designing them like they were a product. Start with the principles. What am I trying to accomplish? What are the behaviors I'd like to encourage? And then go back and brainstorm the ideas. What could I do to create that form? Hopefully some of the tools in this document were also helpful for you. As a reminder, there's a list of resources here. I find it to be very inspiring to go read about other teams and hear how they're doing things. And maybe you can pick off best practice and ideas from there as well. So we will end there. Thank you again for attending. This is the first time I've presented on this topic. So thanks for also humoring as we work through some of the kinks of that process. But it was great meeting everyone.
That's amazing. So for those of you who are going to ask just after this, we will in fact be sending the recording, the links to these resources and other resources that came up in the session. Our next event dates will also be in your follow-up email. And if you are interested in geeking out some more about awesome meeting things, we encourage you to enroll in the course that is associated with this session. And with that, thank you so much, Shishir. This has been awesome. It's been really lovely to get geeky deep on meeting things that aren't just, esoteric sciencey. So I really appreciate the business perspective and sharing with us. And if anybody would like to stick around and ask a few questions, you're welcome to for a couple minutes. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right.
Right. It's so clear that the value of trying to design your meeting system so that these types of meetings work in concert with one another. So if you design in isolation, a cadence meeting, without considering where the context meetings and the catalyst meetings are happening, then, it works in absentia from the rest of the thing. But if you design them together, it feels like your cadence meetings can become more tight, perhaps more focused on that, and lead to better results in some of the other types of meetings.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
For the win.
Yeah, I ended up focusing more on the mechanics of individual meetings as opposed to the meeting operating system or the meeting flow model as you guys describe it. There's probably a whole other interesting session to be had on right. That. The as you described, part of the reason we can have large context meetings is that we're super clear that they are not catalyst meetings. The goal of this meeting is not to reach a decision or reach consensus and so on. I'm just trying to get everybody informed, and creating separate space for that is what allows that to happen. But I think that's a step that many people miss. And they have their staff meeting is their decision-making meeting, and they forget that actually that's the at least for us, the mechanics of that meeting are very different, because you come to a catalyst meeting very prepared in our case.
Right, and if you put that in a template of some sort, then that helps reinforce that it looks like we slipped from a cadence meeting into a decision-making meeting where clearly don't have the right tool for that at our present meeting. We should probably have that in our scheduled or meeting. And I had a question for you about The one came up about what percentage of your meetings fit. What do you do when something comes up that doesn't fit into your planned meeting sequence?
Well, I mean, I think I have another principle, which is ad hoc meetings. I actually think ad hoc and this is one of our principles, is ad hoc meetings are undesirable, and that's not a commonly shared viewpoint. But my view is ad hoc meetings end up, when you don't have the right set of forums, ad hoc meetings pop up. And I think ad hoc meetings suffer from two things. They suffer from the obvious scheduling conflict of, in order to get this done, I got to get these 5 people, but they have busy calendars. And so inevitably it takes longer to schedule than I anticipated. By the time I get to the meeting, it's like, well, I actually needed this answer last week, but that's, thank you for getting together. The other that I think is more applicable to this group is I find ad hoc meetings are very hard to design the right game for, because there's not enough time for a group to build common behavior. And I at least pointed that out here as well, that this group, a group of 50-ish of us that have never really met each other, trying to come to a common understanding of how this meeting should operate and what are the rules and don't press that button and so on. And what's the level of preparation required and who's supposed to speak when and so on. Well, those are all things we learn in a forum, and the forum learns. It's like the forum is almost its own entity. And ad hoc meetings don't have that. And so we show up in this ad hoc meeting and say, okay, we're going to have a meeting about deciding about this thing. And then you show up and you realize, oh, actually, we forgot to designate who's really in charge of the prep here and who the contributors are. And we would have been better off saying, this is a Catalyst meeting and it goes into one of our Catalyst meeting slots. And so it's, worth saying that I think ad hoc meetings are bad, but I think flexible meetings are very important. So, for example, our Catalyst meeting slots are not actually a meeting; they are a time period that is reserved for that type of meeting, and so people sign up for them. But the expectations are clear, right? It's fixed time. Nobody's allowed to schedule over that time. Please don't take any other meetings, because you never know which Catalyst meeting you're going to get called into. And this is how the meeting forum works. And our framework for it is kind of close to Gokul's model for Spade. But you have to name these audiences. In fact, we have it set up in a doc, so this Slack message goes out beforehand and says, "Oh, you're the approver. You're the contributor." So on. So that's my view. Is like, create ad hoc meetings should create their own space of, these are going to be where we keep the ad hoc cadence meetings. These are where we keep the ad hoc context meetings. The Catalyst meetings are the ones that are the most, I think, important to protect. Cadence meetings will overrun everybody's calendar if you don't do anything about it. That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the things to evolve to, where people, have such a negative reaction to a staff meeting of whatever you call it, that's your cadence meeting, because I think my experience is a lot of them become ad hoc in their implementation. They don't have the strong design that you're talking about. I think that's one of the key takeaways for me, is strong design.
I think Grizel mentioned earlier that some leaders think that they like to have things be natural. And I think that's under-designed and broken for most people, because you can't design natural that works for everybody's way of thinking and everybody's way of interacting to be effective. It just that's undesigned.
Yeah, there's a super good I think it was a TED talk by a guy named Rick Hickey, and it's called Simple versus Familiar, I think. Rick or Rich Hickey? Simple Made Easy, Rich Hickey. And I think whenever somebody talks about it should feel natural, and this is not just, I refer to them to this talk, and he starts with this etymology. He goes and breaks down the word easy and simple. And in particular, he goes to this word familiar. And easy is meant, what people confuse these two terms: natural, simple, easy. So they confuse them, and he breaks them into two buckets: simple and easy. And one of the things he describes is easy, and I'm going to forget the etymology of the word, but basically its root comes back to a word that is rooted in familiar. That what people really mean when they say easy or natural or so on is familiar. It's similar to something I've done before. When they say simple, what they really mean is composable. That this is a thing that is built on first principles. Is a thing that can be stacked on top. Legos are probably one of my best examples of simple, as every Lego attaches to every other Lego. And I always find one of the hardest parts of designing anything, designing products, designing meetings, so on, is finding that balance between simple and easy. Because people will, you'll notice like in Coda, some part of it is very easy. It looks like a document. It's a blinking cursor. You can do whatever you like there. Some parts are unfamiliar. Oh, I never pressed a button in a document. I never had a checkbox. I can do all these other things. Those things might actually be quite simple, but they may not be familiar. So I always like to break apart that word and say, we can make a meeting feel familiar. We can make it match your previous expectations without necessarily breaking the principles. So I don't think natural means undesigned. Natural just means familiar. This is, I had a really interesting experience recently where I was asked to help redesign. I'm on the board of Spotify, and I was asked to help redesign the Spotify board meetings for a group of people that, there's a group of 10 board members that get together 4 times a year and then not really interact with each other otherwise. So being familiar is super important because they can't show up in this meeting and be asked to do things that are a little bit that are different and require learning and so on. But Daniel, the CEO, had all sorts of objectives on how he wanted to change the board. And so we spent a long time coming up with something that met both tests. So that's I find that to be a really interesting analogy for it.
Scott had a quick question about trust. If any question about trust could possibly be quick. if you wanted to
or simple that. Or easy.
Yeah, and Elise's answer is definitely a good one. And Scott, what kind of trust did you mean?
It's the thanks. It's the assessment of trust that is in any meeting. How apparent it is a different question. Just kind of starting from the principle that meetings go better if the trust is higher.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe I'll answer at a couple different levels. I mean, I think trust is built over time, but it's also built intentionally. And one of the main, I get asked whenever we design our meeting cadence, we do that chart I showed of what percentage of our times are cadence, context, and catalyst. Inevitably, everybody wants to crush the context meetings. They seem useless. Why do we need to get together every week and talk about this topic? Why do we need a social hour? We do these things we call hackathons where we do it 4 times a year. And when there's not a pandemic, we force everybody around the world to come together in one place to do it as a shared team. My view is part of the main reasons why you have to design a meeting flow model and think about what we call context meetings in that flow is the context meetings are where you build trust. And so those forums and thinking through how do they happen? How do people share a bit about themselves that reveals that, oh, we're all human. We're all just trying to do the best for this company. Or maybe, maybe you're not, and that becomes apparent too. But help people understand that. So one answer I would give is I think your meeting flow model, before you get to an individual meeting, but how you run your whole culture, like one of the objectives has to be, how am I going to establish enough pairwise trust between the different participants of my team, and which types of trust are most important? That's one answer I'd give. The second I'd give is within each forum, I think there are a set of behaviors that encourage trust and a set of behaviors that discourage trust. And I mean, one of the easiest, if I were to get to a really practical example, one of the easiest ones in my mind is, if people are not asked to share their opinion or falsely or sort of performatively asked to share their opinion, it erodes trust. How does everybody feel about this? Oh, nobody seems to object. All right, let's keep going. That's a great way to lose trust with your team. And on the flip side, the moment, actually Claire has a really good one that I didn't get to walk through her offsite toolkit. She has this exercise she calls check in and check out that she does in her offsites that I really like. That is built on the idea that, no, I'm going to pause and really try to understand how everybody feels about this. Now, one of the problems with that is, so in meeting flow modeling, it's about giving time and space in your weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual calendar for what are our trust building forums. Within a meeting, the easiest way to build trust is to spend time on it. The problem is we rarely have the time to spend on it. And it'd be great to go around and make sure we understand how everybody feels, and it'd be great to sort of deeply explore and understand each one, and so. But we often are stuck, and we don't have enough time. And so the thing we do with Pulse is really built for this, is let's give people a chance and a time for that trust to be built, or a way for that to be built that doesn't take a lot of time. Because I think oftentimes we equate trust building with time, and there's definitely some element of it that is, but there are techniques to build trust that don't require time, and sort of brainstorming those I think can be really impactful as well. So those are sort of two things I would think about in terms of.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
I threw in a link to the trust equation, which expresses some of, I think, a really nice way of expressing how you build trust in terms of the different values in play. So if you design for credibility, reliability, and intimacy to be things that you're building in your meetings. And one of the things we see that companies do, like Coda is talking about, as Shishir is talking about here, is rituals, right? Like the check-in, check-out rituals design for exactly those kinds of things over time. Wow, you guys, we took an extra 15 minutes of your time, Shishir. Thank you so much for
of course
sticking around with us.
Yeah.
I will
great session.
Pull all of the recording together. We'll edit it up. We'll send this out with all of the material. If there's anything else you would like me to include when I send this to both the people who stuck with us and all the people who couldn't make it because it's terrible time in the morning, let me know. I'll probably get that out by tomorrow.
I think just the doc we walked through has all the resources. So I'm excited to see the recording and what everybody thinks. And anybody who has questions or thoughts, I'm easy to find. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, so on. So there's not, the nice part about Shishir Mehrotra is there's just not that many of us out there. So easy to find me.
All right, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Have a wonderful
Thank you very much.
weekend, and we'll
Bye-bye.
see you all next time.